Pakistan needs to up the game to raise the narrative to a new status. Because this is an opportunity. It is an opportunity. What would constitute a successful conference? For me, it is a diplomatic opportunity for a whole day, right? If I remember the program from 8:10 in the morning to about 4:30 in the evening, world leaders, agency leaders, UN leaders, maybe even some prime ministers and so on and so forth, will only be focused on Pakistan. That is a huge diplomatic opportunity, where we sometimes yearn for a phone call here or a phone call there. This is a diplomatic moment. This is a diplomatic conference, and not we should not see it as an aid conference. It's not a question of donor fatigue either. I think we should call it what it is, including to them. It is donor uninterest. If we come across as wanting to solve our current economic crisis through flood relief, it is not as if the world doesn't understand that, right? Someone whose house has fallen down, whose cattle has been swept away, is not going to wait for this donor conference or the IMF or the dollar or the stock exchange.
The floods, what expectations do you have from the donor conference?
I do not have very high expectations if people are thinking that you will go with a bag and bring it back full of international support or resources or money. And in fact, what we've seen is the international community has not shown the actual commitment to match its words. Not even to the extent of previous catastrophes such as the last flood. Now, this is a complex issue. I do not mean to be cynical here, but I think we should be very clear not to go in with that expectation, but to go in with a case about the floods, which should not just be about what we want from the rest of the world, but should also be about what we are doing about this ourselves. In some ways, I think we have a tough case here in our own mind because it's a complicated case. You can make a case about floods. A natural disaster comes, there's a lot of devastation, and we want immediate relief to put it back together again. On the other hand, what we've been saying, and the world has been saying with climate change is, this is not about a flood. This is about being in the line of constant climatic impacts. In fact, this wasn't even a flood in that sense, and we should be very careful about using that word because you're already seeing international pushback on that. This was a series of climatic events that started with a heat wave, which really the peak of which was a cloudburst and rain event. And then the flood made it even more. I'm sorry, I'm putting a lot of stuff here, but that is the challenge before Pakistan and for many other countries. I think Pakistan has a very, very good friend, a surprisingly good friend, happens to be the Secretary General of the United Nations. Secretary General Guterres has done this because he's been a friend of Pakistan since when he was the Prime Minister of Portugal, but also because as Secretary General, he has realized that climate and climate adaptation is an ongoing issue. And so for him, these floods and the scale of them, the visual impact of them, was an opportunity to highlight this. Now we need to reciprocate that by talking about these, by putting our case forward, not simply as a sympathy case, not simply as a victim case, but as a climate action case. By demonstrating that we understand what we need to do, we are willing to do it, and what we are asking for the world is to meet us in that battle, not as a charity case, but as a justice case.
So, of course, I understand that the appeal is important for the world to understand that climate change is a global issue and this is a matter of justice. But is that reason enough for any country to be able to step up and move forward with regards to the kind of help or support that is needed? Because we've rarely seen collective responses to global concerns.
Yeah, and I think you're exactly right. I don't think you will see it here. I really don't think. I don't think it's as simple as Pakistan demanding justice and the world giving us justice. When that happened before in history? If justice wasn't given for things even like slavery, Why do you assume that it will be given so easily for climate? That doesn't mean we don't raise the issue. That means we have to think about how we raise the issue. Countries, it's not a question of donor fatigue either. I think we should call it what it is, including to them. It is donor uninterest. Fatigue is when you've done so much that you are tired of it. It's not about Pakistan. Climate is a dangerous thing for donor countries because if they start giving out on climate justice to Pakistan, this was not the only disaster that happened this year. There was an equally big, by many people, larger mega drought in Africa this year. There was a heat wave in China this year. There were hurricanes in Florida this year. There were fires in Europe this year, right? So if you accept the principle that emitting countries are going to pay out for climate catastrophe, that's what the political debate is about. Now, I do not suggest that you don't make that point, but I do suggest that we be realistic enough to understand that our making that point doesn't equate to someone saying, okay, you're making a good point, therefore I'm going to put in 30 billion here. Now, having said that, I think the most important thing said in this program was by Ali and earlier by Farooq, both pointed out. This is a diplomatic moment. This is a diplomatic conference, and not we should not see it as an aid conference. And what I mean by that is the best thing you can do is to get those friendships, is to, because Pakistan does have a credibility problem in certain parts of the world, to demonstrate to the world that we are serious about our own people's well being, we are serious about climate change, because the world is smart enough to understand if we come across as wanting to solve our current economic crisis through frudgeries, it is not as if the world doesn't understand that. Right? Let me just do the math and be very, very upfront about it. So the estimate, according to some, is that the floods cost is about 30 billion. It is already being questioned. Let's say it's about half of that, 15 billion. There's about 2 billion that's been committed. There is 1 billion that we are asking for here, which may or may not come, but let's assume it comes. Let's assume it's matched by another 1 billion by Pakistan. That adds up to 4 billion. Who do you think is going to pay the remaining 14 billion to 10 billion to 25 billion? The cost of this catastrophe, like every natural disaster in the world, is going to be borne by the people of Pakistan. Right? Someone whose house has fallen down, whose cattle has been swept away, is not going to wait for this donor conference or the IMF or the dollar or the stock exchange. They are going to sell whatever they had in saving. They're going to take the saving they were making for their daughter's wedding and use that now to build that house. Right? So this, I think, Pakistan should understand and the world should understand that, like in every disaster, the real payment is going to be made by the people who suffered. Now, the responsibility of the world, and first of all of Pakistan itself, is to create the conditions that, with ongoing climate change, the vulnerable poor people of Pakistan who haven't contributed to this crisis, you and I have, just like as the US and EU have, right? The rich Pakistanis have, but the poor haven't. Why do they keep paying for it, and what can we do to make them resilient? Right? That's the resilience question. Now, if we come across at this conference as being honest in really wanting to do adaptation, climate impact in a way that gives resilience to the people of Pakistan, I do think the world will respond. If we come across as trying to just balance our other economic problems by using this as some sort of a cash flow for our dollar crisis or something, I think the world is going to smile, drink tea, and go back. So this, I think, is a test for the world, but it is also an opportunity for Pakistan to change its diplomatic perception abroad as being a country that really cares about climate change, to build on COP27 and be seen as a real climate actor rather than simply a climate victim. I hope I'm not coming across as a negative voice. I think what Farooq is saying, what Ali especially said just now, is exactly right. Pakistan needs to up the game to raise the narrative to a new status. Because this is an opportunity. It is an opportunity. What would constitute a successful conference for me, right? What should happen there? That we should say that, okay, here was an opportunity and we used it well. First of all, I think it is where we started. This is a meeting of friends. It is a diplomatic opportunity for a whole day, right? If I remember the program from 8:10 in the morning to about 4:30 in the evening, world leaders, agency leaders, UN leaders, maybe even some prime ministers and so on and so forth, will only be focused on Pakistan. That is a huge diplomatic opportunity, where we sometimes yearn for a phone call here or a phone call there. This is the performance. Pakistan needs to put forward, right? That changing that narrative that you were saying is a long journey. Sure, it's a long journey, but let's please start, right? Because it's a long journey, let's start here. So if we come across using that 8R, which is a very, very major thing that you've got, that would be thing one. Now, what do we mean by using it? A, if we convince, if we come across to those in that meeting that we have, as Farooq was saying, a credible, thought out plan. Nothing is ever foolproof, nothing is ever perfect. But sincerity, when it is there, can easily be seen. That is focused on the lives and the livelihoods of the people of Pakistan. That is truly about sustainable development. That is not simply about number shell games. If we come across, because the other thing with 8 hours is you can probably do the quick, selling act in 5 minutes, but to maintain it for eight hours, you have to be sincere. I think Pakistan is. If we come across in that time as having thought through what it will take to make the lives of people impacted by not just this flood but by future floods, that's the climate angle. The climate angle is that the flood is not a past issue now. It is something that we expect different types of disasters to keep coming because climate change hasn't gone away. This time it was a flood, maybe next time it will be a drought, right? And so on and so forth. So second thing, we have to come to be seen to be sincere to sustainable development in the plans we put forward. I have four, I'll be very quick. The third one is if we come across as serious about climate change. Pakistan used to be a leader in global climate change back in the 1990s. For a very long time, internationally, we dropped that ball. We seem to be picking it up again now. Here is a chance again to be able to talk about the flood, not only again in victimhood terms, but in climate terms. If we do that, then you're opening the doors not only to this conference, but to a lot of other climate financing, right? Because then people there say, okay, I may not be able to support you here, but there is something called the GEF where you will have my support when your case comes up. There will be the next COP. So building that climate credibility is the third. And the last one is the money part. I think there will be money. Let me make a prediction. There will be money. You don't call a conference like this unless you already have some commitments in hand, right? The Secretary General's own reputation is online. The appeal was his, and it wasn't met, right? So he is the one who sent out the invitations. He wouldn't have sent out invitations if he doesn't have a few checks in his pocket. So those will be enough. That is very, very good, right? We have to be seen to be good custodians of it and to up the game. But, and here is my absolute last point on this money part, what we should be asking for is also structural change. Actually, I care less about the money committed. I want to talk about debt and how that has become the biggest impediment to climate finance. Let's talk about that structural change rather than simply an aid package here or there. If that happens, I think we would have used this moment very well.